On a narrow stretch of water off the coast of Salamis, a single night was about to decide the future of an entire civilization. The sea was dark and heavy, carrying the weight of two empires that had finally met face to face. Far in the distance, the dim glow of thousands of torches flickered across the decks of the Persian fleet, a floating forest of ships that seemed to stretch endlessly across the horizon. For the small Greek alliance gathering in the shadows, every splash of an oar, every whisper of the wind, felt like a reminder of how close they were to the edge of extinction. How could a force so outnumbered, so battered, so close to collapse, hope to change the course of history in just a few hours? Across the Greek coastline, fear had spread faster than wildfire. Entire families fled. Athens as smoke rose above the city, drifting like a shroud over temples and homes abandoned in despair. Under the command of Xerxes I, the Persian Empire was at the height of its power. Its armies covered the land like a moving storm, and its navy was vast enough to intimidate even the bravest warriors. To the Greeks, it seemed as if the world itself was tilting toward one outcome: total conquest. Xerxes I believed that the final victory was already within his grasp. He had crossed mountains, bridged seas, and brought together a force larger than anything Greece had ever seen. With confidence that bordered on certainty, he looked at the remaining Greek ships as nothing more than the last flicker of a flame soon to be blown out. His commanders echoed that confidence, convinced that resistance was hopeless. But among the Greeks there was one man who refused to surrender to despair. Themistocles, an Athenian with sharp instincts and a stubborn faith in strategy over strength, saw something others could not. Even as fellow leaders doubted him, even as citizens whispered about the hopelessness of their situation, he held firm to an idea that felt almost reckless. He believed that victory did not always belong to the largest force. Sometimes it belonged to those who understood the battlefield more deeply, who could see a path hidden from the eyes of an overconfident enemy. Still, fear weighed heavily on the hearts of the Greek soldiers. Many had lost their homes as the Persians advanced. Some had left families behind. Young warriors stood at the shoreline, gripping their spears, trying to steady their breathing as the water reflected the orange glow of the burning city. In the silence of that night, their thoughts drifted between duty and dread, yet beneath their fear, a quiet determination formed. If Greece was to fall, they would not allow it to fall easily. The tension in the camps grew as leaders argued over their next move. Some wanted to retreat farther, to scatter into the islands and survive however they could. Others pushed for a last stand, knowing that running would only delay the inevitable. Themistocles listened to every voice, every fear, every fragment of hope, and when the debate reached its breaking point, he made his stand. He proposed a plan that sounded almost impossible. Lure the Persians into the narrow waters of Salamis, where their numbers would become a disadvantage rather than a strength. Force them into a place where their movements would be restricted, where their overwhelming might would be trapped by the very sea they commanded. It was bold. It was dangerous. It was their only chance. On that night, the air felt heavier than ever. The waves rolled slowly through the dark, and the Greek soldiers watched Themistocles with a mix of uncertainty and trust. Somewhere out on the water, the vast Persian fleet waited confident in a victory they believed nothing could prevent. And yet, in this moment of fear and fragile hope, the spark of an extraordinary strategy was born. And so, as that fragile spark of strategy took shape in Themistocles' mind, the path toward the Battle of Salamis began to reveal itself. Themistocles understood something that few leaders on either side had taken the time to consider. The narrow waterways surrounding Salamis were unlike the open seas where large fleets dominated. Here, the shoreline curved sharply. Rocky outcroppings broke the water surface. The space between the island and the mainland tightened like the neck of an hourglass. For a huge navy, this was not a battlefield. It was a bottleneck waiting to swallow them whole. Themistocles saw opportunity in every obstacle. If the Persian fleet entered this confined space, their remarkable numbers would turn against them. Their ships would crowd together, their movements would slow, their lines of communication would fracture. To defeat such a force, one did not need to outmatch its strength. One only needed to place that strength where it could not be used. Inside a dimly lit shelter on the shore, the leaders of the Greek city-states gathered to discuss their fate. The air felt thick, heavy, with the mix of fear and pride. Flames from flickering torches cast uneven shadows on the wooden walls, making every expression look sharper, more intense. Some commanders paced restlessly. Others folded their arms, reluctant to show how shaken they truly were. Voices rose and fell as each man fought to be heard. "We cannot fight them here," one shouted. "They will crush us." Another replied firmly, "If we retreat again, there will be nothing left to defend." In the midst of this storm of doubt, Themistocles spoke with a calm that cut through the noise. "If we run, they will hunt us. If we scatter, they will swallow each of us whole. But if we fight here in these waters, we make their size our weapon." His voice was steady, almost quiet, yet every man in the room leaned in closer. Some stared at him with uncertainty, others with curiosity. Themistocles had a reputation for bold ideas, but this idea was more than bold. It was a gamble with the future of Greece. Still, he pressed forward. "We cannot win by force," he said. "We win by understanding the sea better than they do." Outside, the night deepened. The wind carried the sound of distant Persian drums across the water. Themistocles knew that even the best arguments would not be enough. He needed to push Persia into committing the first move. So he acted on a plan that only a mind desperate for survival could conceive. He sent a secret message to Xerxes, carried by a trusted messenger. The message was simple: the Greeks are frightened. They plan to flee at dawn. Strike now, and victory is yours. It was a lie crafted with precision. When Xerxes received the message, confidence surged through him. He imagined the Greeks scrambling in fear, ready to scatter. To him, this was the final confirmation that his dominance was unquestioned. Without hesitation, he ordered his ships to move deeper into the narrow straits during the night, believing he was closing his fist around a fleeing enemy, but he was walking directly into the trap. As the Persian ships slid across the dark waters, their lanterns glowed faintly, like moving stars drifting into a place where the sky felt too close. Themistocles stood on the Greek shoreline, watching the silhouettes grow. The sea breeze brushed past him, carrying the scent of salt and the low rumble of distant oars. Behind him, the Greek soldiers prepared in silence. Their fear remained, but now it was mixed with something stronger: purpose. The waves slapped gently against the sides of the Greek ships as sailors tied ropes, checked oars, whispered brief words of courage. Some remembered family, others whispered to the gods. Yet all understood that the night ahead would define everything they had left. Out on the water, the distance between the two great fleets narrowed inch by inch, swallowed by the darkness that lay over Salamis. The trap was set. The enemy was closing in. And by dawn, the sea would explode into a battle that would shape the fate of the world. And just as the trap tightened around the advancing Persian fleet, the first light of dawn slowly crept over the waters of Salamis. The sky shifted from deep blue to a pale, shimmering gold, and the sea beneath it glowed as if it had caught fire. The rising sun stretched across the surface, turning every ripple into a blade of red light. It was a morning that felt too calm, too quiet for what was about to erupt. Out in the strait, the enormous Persian fleet had pushed deeper into the narrow passage during the night. Now, with daylight revealing the true shape of the battlefield, their size became a prison. Ships crowded together, their oars brushing against one another. Commanders shouted orders that were lost beneath the echoing slap of water. The formation that once seemed unstoppable was now tangled, compressed, struggling to maneuver in a space far too small for its massive numbers. From the Greek side, the triremes waited like coiled springs. Smaller, lighter, and built for speed, they cut smoothly across the early morning waves. At the bow of one ship stood a young Greek warrior barely past his teenage years. His hands clenched the wooden railing as he stared ahead at the wall of Persian ships. His heart pounded so loudly he thought others might hear it. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce clarity took hold. He had lost his home. He had fled the burning streets of Athens with nothing but what he could carry. Now he felt a rising determination. This was his chance to fight for everything taken from him. Behind him, the trireme commander raised his voice. "This is our moment. Hold steady." The young warrior exhaled deeply. The salty wind filled his lungs. He felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. As the signal horn cut through the air, the Greek triremes surged forward. The first collision of hulls echoed like thunder rolling over the water. Greek ships darted between the Persian lines, ramming at angles impossible for the larger vessels to achieve. The sound of cracking wood spread through the strait as the Persian ships struggled to reposition. Many could not. Their own numbers trapped them. Oars tangled. Hulls scraped violently against one another. What had begun as a confident advance turned into a spiraling chaos. On his golden chair positioned high on a cliff overlooking the sea, Xerxes watched the unfolding battle with pride at first. His eyes glimmered with certainty. But as moments passed, certainty melted into confusion. Why were his ships slowing? Why were they colliding? Why did the Greek vessels seem to slip effortlessly between his lines, striking and retreating with precision? His commanders exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to speak. Xerxes leaned forward. His jaw tightened. What he saw was not the collapse of Greek morale, it was the collapse of his own formation. Below him, the sea was turning into a storm of splintering decks and breaking oars. Greek triremes rammed into Persian ships, one after another withdrawing quickly before counterattacks could form. The young warrior at the bow of the Greek ship felt the jolt of impact as they struck a massive enemy vessel. The force rattled his bones. He watched Persians stumble across their own deck, unable to stabilize their footing in the cramped space. The Greek rowers pulled hard, retreating in time to avoid being pinned. Shouts rose from every direction. The strait was now a maze of panic. Some Persian ships tried to push forward only to crash into allies blocking the way. Others attempted to reverse, but the water was too tight, leaving them spinning helplessly. Above this chaos, Xerxes' face shifted again. Confidence faded into strain, then into disbelief. His fleet, the pride of his empire, was unraveling before his eyes, and then came the turn. The unmistakable moment when a force of thousands realizes it is no longer advancing but collapsing. The Persian lines began to buckle under the relentless Greek assault. One ship broke formation, then another, and another. The great fleet of Persia had begun to break, and as the Persian lines buckled under the relentless Greek assault, the chaos that had begun as a ripple now spread like a tidal wave through the entire fleet. What had been a wall of ships only moments earlier was now breaking apart, fragmenting into pieces that could no longer hold their formation. The narrow strait, which had once trapped the Persians with quiet subtlety, now trapped them in a storm of their own making. Themistocles' strategy had reached its turning point. Persian commanders shouted desperately, calling for order, urging their crews to regroup, but the sea offered no mercy. The more they tried to correct their course, the more they collided with their own ships. Rows of oars splintered, hulls scraped violently. Some ships capsized as panicked sailors, shifted weight in every direction, trying to avoid the crushing blows from all sides. One after another, Persian vessels began to sink. Water rushed across decks, already slick with seawater. As the larger ships tilted, the smaller ones nearby were forced aside, spinning helplessly in the current. What had once been the most feared navy in the known world was now fighting for space, for visibility, for survival. The chain of command dissolved into confusion, and the battlefield became a maze of desperation. Meanwhile, the Greek formation held firm. Their triremes, organized and disciplined, cut through the chaos like blades slicing through tangled rope. Commanders shouted crisp instructions. Crews rowed in steady rhythm. Their smaller, faster vessels maneuvered around the struggling Persian ships with remarkable precision. They struck at the exposed flanks where the Persian lines had cracked, hitting the exact places where their enemy was weakest. From his golden seat on the hillside, Xerxes watched the unfolding disaster. His once confident gaze now flickered with disbelief. The crackling energy of certainty that had carried him through countless victories faded into something colder. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if squinting might change what he was seeing on the water below. But nothing could change it. The truth was clear. His mighty fleet was collapsing under the pressure of a force he had underestimated. His breathing slowed. Confusion melted into a sharp, stinging realization. He was witnessing not just a setback, but a defeat. On the water, the young Greek warrior who had once trembled with fear now felt a surge of resolve. As his ship rammed into another Persian hull, he held his footing. The jolt nearly knocked him backward, but a fellow soldier placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Stay with me," he said. "We are holding them." The young warrior nodded, breathless but determined. Every sound around him felt louder now, every splash, every crack of wood, every command shouted across the deck. Amid the chaos, he saw acts of courage that would be remembered for generations. A rower pushing through exhaustion to keep the ship moving, a commander leaping from one deck to another to rally men who were losing hope, a sailor pulling a comrade to safety moments before their ship collided with another. Themistocles watched the battle unfold with an intensity that bordered on stillness. His plan was working, but not without cost. For every Persian ship sinking, there were Greek sailors fighting with everything they had to stay alive. Even victory carried a heavy price. Still, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, the outcome became undeniable. The Persian fleet could no longer maintain the fight. Their ships were scattered and broken, their lines had dissolved. Their confidence was gone. The order to retreat swept across what remained of the Persian formation. Ships turned away from the strait, rowing desperately toward open water. It was no longer a battle. It was an escape. A final admission that Xerxes' dream of conquering Greece had died in the Strait of Salamis. For the Greeks, the sight of the retreating enemy brought a surge of relief so deep it shook through the entire fleet. But it was relief laced with sorrow. The sea around them was littered with debris, broken masts, drifting oars. The water had fallen quiet, but it was a heavy, somber quiet. Victory had come. But victory had demanded a tremendous sacrifice. The sun shone over the strait, illuminating the wreckage, the stillness, and the undeniable truth. Greece had survived. The tide of war had turned. And as the last echoes of battle faded into the stillness of the Salamis Strait, the true weight of what had happened began to settle over the Greek fleet. They had stood against a force that seemed impossible to withstand. They had endured fear, fire, and overwhelming odds, and they had done more than survive. They had changed the future. For Greece, the victory at Salamis was not just a triumph on the water. It was the moment that protected their independence at the very edge of collapse. Without this battle, the story of Greece might have ended right there along the shoreline. But instead, the triumph opened the path towards something extraordinary. In the years that followed, Athens rose into what would later be remembered as a golden age, a period of art, philosophy, politics, and ideas that would shape the Western world for centuries. Democracy strengthened, poetry thrived. Thinkers and builders transformed a recovering nation into one of history's greatest cultural beacons. And all of it began on a morning when a small fleet refused to back down. For Persia, the defeat marked a turning point as well. The loss at Salamis weakened their naval superiority and forced a retreat that slowed their expansion across the region. Though the empire remained powerful, the momentum of conquest that had carried Xerxes so far faltered. The fear that had once spread across the Greek world turned into resolve, and the balance of power shifted. Greece was no longer a vulnerable collection of small city-states. It had proven it could defend itself. Amid all of this, one figure rose above the rest. Themistocles became a symbol of strategy over strength, a reminder that the most effective victories are often born not from size or force, but from insight, courage, and timing. He had seen what others could not. He had believed when others doubted, and he had chosen to act even when the path ahead looked impossible. His name became forever tied to the idea that a single mind guided by clarity and conviction can redirect the fate of nations. And that perhaps is the lasting heart of the story. The Battle of Salamis is more than a chapter in ancient history. It is the timeless reminder that intellect can overcome overwhelming power, that preparation can defeat chaos, and that determination can carry even the smallest group through the darkest moments. It is the story of an underdog that refused to accept defeat. A story of people pushed to the edge yet finding strength they did not know they had. For many listeners today, especially those in the United States, the message resonates deeply. It mirrors the classic spirit of standing up against impossible odds, of believing in something greater than fear, of understanding that courage is not the absence of uncertainty, but the decision to move forward anyway. It reflects the belief that every person, no matter how small or overlooked, can shape the world around them when they act with purpose. So imagine yourself in that moment. The sky is beginning to lighten. The sea is restless from the night's battle. Around you, men are exhausted, bruised, breathing heavily yet still standing. You look across the water and see the defeated Persian fleet pulling back, the threat that once felt unstoppable now fading into the horizon. You have survived, but more importantly, you have made a stand. If you had been there on that night, with the future hanging by a thread, what choice would you have made? Would you have run? Would you have hesitated? Or would you, like those warriors on the Greek triremes, have held your ground in the face of a force far greater than yourself? The story of Salamis invites each of us to look inward, to consider what courage means in our own lives, and to remember that even in the most difficult moments, a single decision can carry the power to shape everything that comes after.